Hi, this is Andy Sykes with Sykes Elder Law in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and I'm here today to talk to you about qualifying for Medicaid using an irrevocable burial reserve, and particularly about the timing of that, when you should buy it. Now, if you're not familiar with it, an irrevocable burial reserve is an amount of money that you can put aside when you're spending down to qualify for Medicaid, and it can be used for things like paying a funeral home, paying for a burial space, paying for funeral luncheon, all that sort of thing. So it's usually a good idea to do that because when you're spending down, it's better to spend the money for something that you're going to use, that's going to be useful to you later on, rather than just have it be spent and have it gone forever. Now, the amount of money that you can put aside is going to vary across the country. In fact, in Pennsylvania, where I practice, it even varies from county to county. And the tip I have for you today is that it may matter when you buy the burial reserve, particularly if you're married. And that's because of something called the Community Spouse Resource Allowance. Now, to understand the Community Spouse Resource Allowance, you have to understand that when you're applying for Medicaid, the state looks at all of the resources owned by the applicant and the applicant's spouse, and that person's called the community spouse. Now, some of the assets are going to be exempt, meaning they don't count. And then some of them are non-exempt, and they are countable when you're spending down. So the community spouse is allowed this thing called the Community Spouse Resource Allowance, and that's an amount that they can keep, and it's equal to 1/2 of those non-exempt resources on date of admission. It is subject to a minimum and a maximum, but I'm not going to go into that today. I'm going to use an example to show you how this works that doesn't use a minimum or a maximum. $200,000. Let's say in our example, this couple had $200,000 on date of admission, and of course you divide that by 2 to get the half that makes up the Community Spouse Resource Allowance. So in this case, it'd be $100,000. Now, the institutionalized spouse, I'll abbreviate that, is allowed a certain amount of money too, and in Pennsylvania the maximum would be $8,000. So we'll say for this example, institutionalized spouse can keep $8,000. So if they can keep 108 together, then that leaves $92,000 that they would be over-resourced. So out of that they can spend a certain amount to buy irrevocable burial reserves. And let's just say in this example, they can spend $15,000 each in their county. So they're going to spend $30,000 to buy 2 burial reserves. And that means that they're going to have to spend down from here $62,000. Now, the timing can be important too. Remember that the Community Spouse Resource Allowance is based on the date of admission value. So let's say that they got a little anxious and they heard that you can spend down money when you're trying to qualify for Medicaid, and they bought the burial reserves before date of admission. Now that would be a mistake, and I'll show you why. That would mean on date of admission they would have $170,000 instead of the $200,000 because they already bought the reserves. So to get the Community Spouse Resource Allowance, remember we're going to divide by 2 based on the date of admission value. So that's divided by 2, $85,000. Now, the institutionalized spouse can still keep the $8,000, meaning now they're going to have to spend down $77,000. So you can see that by buying the burial reserves too soon, the Community Spouse Resource Allowance went from $100,000 down to $85,000. Community spouse going forward for his or her nest egg is going to have $15,000 less. And then the amount they spend down has gone from $62,000 to $77,000. So they kind of lose out 2 different ways there. If you'd like to learn more tips like this, you can get our report called The 7 Costliest Mistakes to Avoid When a Spouse Enters a Nursing Home. You can get that for free on our website. And as always, remember it's best to work with an elder law attorney if you want to get the best results in Medicaid planning.